Religion is this massive, complex part of human society. Everywhere you look, it builds communities, shapes cultures, gives people meaning.
It really does.
But when we just say religion, we're really lumping together an incredible variety of groups and practices, aren't we? They are not all the same thing.
Absolutely not. They differ wildly in, size, structure, beliefs, and crucially, how they relate to the wider world around them. Understanding that spectrum isn't just academic, it's pretty essential for making sense of social dynamics.
And that's precisely our mission in this deep dive. Whether you're a sociology student, maybe wrestling with these concepts for a class, or just someone fascinated by human behavior and belief systems.
Which covers a lot of people.
Right. We pulled together a stack of sources, articles, research, notes you shared to help you navigate the world of religious organizations and movements.
Think of this as maybe your shortcut to understanding the key sociological insights. We're going to unpack how these groups are categorized, from the massive established ones to smaller, newer, or more individualistic forms.
Yeah.
Explore why they form and change and look at what draws people in. Get ready to distinguish churches from denominations, sects from cults, understand NRMs, and even touch on the rise of self-driven spirituality.
Let's dive into this material.
Okay, let's unpack this fascinating landscape.
Right.
The sources we're looking at highlight that sociologists use specific categories to try and bring some order to this immense diversity.
Why?
They talk about churches, denominations, sects, cults, and new religious movements, or NRMs.
Right. And these aren't just arbitrary labels, are they? They help us understand fundamental differences in how these groups are structured, who they attract, what they believe, and how they fit into or maybe stand apart from mainstream society.
Exactly.
It's a toolkit for sociological analysis, really.
Yeah.
Exactly. So if we start at one end, think of churches as the giants of the religious world.
Yeah, the material describes them as these massive established organizations with huge reach and influence. We're talking memberships that can span entire countries, even globally. They've been around for a long time, often centuries or millennia, like the Roman Catholic Church, for example.
And they're typically highly structured. You see a clear hierarchy, professional clergy, formal organization. Membership is often a birthright. You're born into it.
What's also key about churches in this model is their relationship with the state. Historically, many have been closely tied to the government, like the Church of England.
Sure.
And they often see themselves as holding the sole legitimate path to religious truth. That sort of monopoly idea.
Right, that claim to unique legitimacy. So that's the big established institution. Moving along the spectrum, we come to denominations.
These are described as independent groups that share some features with churches, but are, distinct. They're smaller than those massive churches, but still quite large.
Still significant, yeah.
Operating regionally or even internationally. Think groups like Methodists or Pentecostals, which are mentioned in the sources.
What's really interesting here is how many denominations actually began. Often they originated as sects that managed to grow, gain followers, and become, more accepted over time.
Oh.
They often have historical ties to serving specific communities, sometimes working class or poorer populations.
And structurally, they tend to be a blend, right? You'll have professional clergy, but also a significant level of active participation from regular members, the lay people.
Exactly. And critically, unlike the often exclusive claim of churches, denominations are generally more accepting of other religious groups existing alongside them. They don't typically claim a monopoly on truth in the same way.
So they're more pluralistic, maybe.
You could say that, yeah. They really sit in that middle ground, less exclusive than a sect, less all-encompassing or historically state-linked than a church. Which brings us to sects.
Ah, yes, the classic sociological definition of sects. Small, often exclusive groups that typically break away from a larger, established religious tradition.
That breakaway moment, often called a schism, is crucial. They frequently form around a charismatic leader and demand a very high level of commitment,
Intense.
discipline, and loyalty from members. The group is usually small and tightly knit.
And unlike churches or denominations, they often lack professional clergy or traditional hierarchical structures. Authority is often very personal, tied to that leader.
Yeah.
The material also notes they can be quite short-lived, especially if the leader dies or the group faces intense external pressure.
Though, as we touched on, some do survive and grow, eventually evolving into something closer to a denomination if they gain wider acceptance.
Okay.
Now, this next one is frequently confused with sects, but the sources make a distinction. Cults.
Right. Cults, in this sociological context,
Yeah.
and it's important to stress that, the sociological context
Yes, definitely.
are often described as more loosely structured spiritual groups.
Mhm.
Their focus isn't necessarily on breaking away from a specific religion or demanding communal adherence to rigid doctrine, but more on, like, individual spiritual development or specific practices.
They also tend to have small, like-minded memberships, but the key difference highlighted is they don't necessarily require the intense, high commitment or fundamental lifestyle change that sects often demand.
Okay, so less all-encompassing.
Generally, yes. And while the term cult can have negative connotations in popular culture, in this sociological sense, they are often less extreme than sects. They frequently lack formal leadership structures or clergy.
Right.
A key characteristic often noted is that they frequently charge fees for their teachings, workshops, or services. The focus is often on personal well-being, self-improvement, or accessing spiritual knowledge,
Rather than doctrine.
rather than strict doctrinal purity or societal transformation.
Exactly. So if you're trying to keep these categories distinct for, say, an exam or just understanding it, churches are the big established institutions. Denominations are their often more flexible offshoots. Sects are the smaller, high-commitment breakaways.
Right.
And cults, in this classification, are often focused on individual spirituality or practices, sometimes for a fee, rather than group doctrine or societal rejection.
That's a good summary.
Yep.
Okay, with those core categories in mind, the material then introduces another powerful way to classify groups, particularly newer ones, based on their relationship to the wider world.
Ah, okay.
This lens comes from sociologist Roy Wallace back in 1984, and it gives us the concept of new religious movements, or NRMs.
This is where it gets really interesting from a sociological perspective, I think, because it's not just about how big you are or how structured, but how you view and interact with the society outside your group.
Precisely. Wallace identified three main types: world-affirming, world-accommodating, and world-rejecting movements. Let's start with world-affirming. The sources link these mostly to the cults we just discussed. Their core idea isn't to reject society, but to help individuals thrive within it.
Yeah, they accept the world as it is, basically, but they offer techniques, knowledge, or practices that promise to enhance your life, improve your chances of success, or unlock your potential within that existing social structure.
Right. Members are often framed as clients seeking a service.
Okay.
And as we noted with the cult definition, this often involves personal development practices, meditation, therapy-like sessions, access to secret knowledge, and yes, they frequently involve fees.
Examples.
Examples given are transcendental meditation and Scientology. They help you succeed in the world, is the idea.
Got it. Then you have world-accommodating movements. The material often links these to denominations. As the name suggests, they don't fully embrace or reject the world.
They sort of make peace with it.
Kinda, yeah. Their focus is on providing spiritual support and community to help followers cope with the challenges of everyday life while still being fully engaged members of society.
So you participate in the NRM, but you also go to work, raise your family, participate in civic life. It's not about withdrawing.
Exactly. The sources note these are often popular in vulnerable communities, offering hope, purpose, and a framework for navigating hardship without demanding withdrawal. Neo-Pentecostalism is provided as an example,
Okay.
a movement that helps people find spiritual strength to live in the world.
Makes sense. And finally, the world-rejecting movements. These align closely with the sociological definition of sex we talked about.
This is the type that explicitly sees mainstream society as corrupt, flawed, or even, well, evil.
A very negative view.
Yes, they seek radical transformation, either by completely withdrawing from society, often forming separate communal living arrangements, or by advocating for a fundamental societal shift, sometimes through divine intervention.
They can be strongly fundamentalist, taking sacred texts very literally, and often hold millenarian beliefs.
The end times idea.
Exactly. Expecting the imminent end of the current world order and the dawn of a new era where they will play a central role. The tragic examples of the People's Temple or the Branch Davidians. They illustrate the potential consequences when groups completely reject and withdraw from the world.
Yeah, those are stark examples. So this Wallace classification gives us this incredible sociological lens, doesn't it? It shows how a group's core orientation towards society shapes its structure, demands on members, and potential trajectory.
It really does. It helps us understand why different groups look so different beyond just their specific beliefs.
Okay. Thinking sociologically, we also need to understand that these groups aren't static. They change, they grow.
Right, they're dynamic. The material explores the dynamics of this, starting with something called the sectarian cycle.
This theory, associated with Stark and Bainbridge, is the model for understanding why sects, which we noted are often unstable, tend to follow a predictable pattern of development or transformation. It's a really neat dynamic process to look at.
It starts with stage one, schism. As we mentioned, this is the breakaway point. When a group forms by separating from a larger church, usually over doctrinal disagreements or perceived compromises by the parent body.
Okay, the split.
Then comes stage two, initial fervor. The new sect has a small, highly committed, and often enthusiastic membership. They usually have a strong, often charismatic leader, and they often experience tension or conflict with wider society because their beliefs or practices are seen as challenging or radical.
High energy, high conflict, maybe.
Potentially, yeah. Next is stage three, denominationalism. If the sect survives and grows, it starts to become more structured. Leadership might become more formalized, rules might soften slightly, and the initial intense fervor might lessen. It's starting to kind of institutionalize.
Becoming more normal in a way.
A bit, yes. Which naturally leads to stage four, establishment. The group gains more followers, becomes more accepted by mainstream society, maybe builds institutions, and looks less like a radical breakaway and more like a regular religious organization integrated into the social landscape.
Almost coming full circle towards becoming more like the group it broke away from.
In some ways, yes. And finally, stage five, further schism. As the group becomes more established and perhaps makes compromises with society or loses the initial zeal, internal disagreements can flare up among members who feel it's straying from its original, purer path.
History repeats itself.
Exactly. This can lead to another group breaking away, essentially restarting the cycle as a new sect.
It's a powerful sociological model because it shows how the very success of a sect can sow the seeds of its eventual transformation or even create new breakaways. It highlights the inherent tension between, charismatic leadership and institutionalization, between revolutionary zeal and societal acceptance.
Absolutely. Beyond this cycle, the sources also delve into broader reasons why NRMs, in general, attract members and grow. They point to three main sociological factors.
Okay, what are they?
First, marginalization. This echoes ideas from thinkers like Weber. The core idea is that NRMs often appeal strongly to people who feel excluded, ignored, or disadvantaged by mainstream society, maybe economically, socially, or culturally.
People on the edges.
Exactly. For these individuals, an NRM can offer a powerful sense of belonging, a new identity, a community where they feel accepted and valued, and a clear purpose that the wider world doesn't seem to provide.
Okay, that makes sense.
Second is relative deprivation. This concept, highlighted by people like Barker, is fascinating because it's not just about lacking material things. It suggests that even people who are materially comfortable might join NRMs if they feel emotionally or spiritually deprived.
So not poor, but feeling empty.
Precisely. They might have jobs, homes, financial security, but they feel a deep sense of meaninglessness, isolation, or a lack of authentic connection. NRMs can step in to fill this void, offering intense community, emotional support, and a sense of deeper purpose.
Okay.
The sources note this can be particularly relevant for young people searching for identity and connection.
Right. And the third reason?
The third reason is response to social change. Linking back to figures like Wilson, the idea here is that NRMs can thrive during periods of rapid societal upheaval. Massive changes like urbanization, globalization, or huge technological shifts.
The times of uncertainty.
Big time. These rapid changes can leave people feeling disoriented, anxious, or that their traditional values and anchors are crumbling. NRMs can offer certainty, clear answers, a strong identity, and a sense of stability and direction in a world that feels confusing and unpredictable.
So whether it's feeling pushed to the edges, feeling empty inside despite outward success, or feeling lost in a rapidly changing world, NRMs offer appealing solutions that resonate with specific segments of the population.
Yeah, it really highlights the social context of religious belief and participation.
Definitely. Now, the material also brings our attention to a different, more recent shift in the religious landscape, the rise of what are often called New Age movements, or NAMs.
Yes, the New Age. These are described as being much more individualistic, fluid, and less focused on joining a structured religious organization or adhering to a fixed dogma compared to the groups we've been discussing.
More pick and mix.
Kind of, yeah. A core characteristic is promoting self-spirituality. This means the individual becomes their own spiritual authority. They decide what is true and meaningful for them, rather than relying on clergy, scripture, or tradition.
Okay, the self is central.
Exactly. This also means there's a lot of freedom to mix and match practices and beliefs from different traditions. You might combine aspects of yoga, astrology, meditation, crystals, and other practices in a very personalized way.
And crucially, they often lack the formal structures, professional clergy, and regular congregational gatherings you'd find in more traditional religious groups.
Right. It's often more about attending workshops, buying books, or joining online groups focused on specific practices.
Examples provided include things like yoga, Reiki, astrology, Feng Shui practices that you can incorporate into your life without necessarily signing up for a specific religious group membership.
Right. The Kendall Project, a study by Heelas and his colleagues in the UK, is highlighted as empirical evidence of this trend. They found that even in an area with relatively high traditional church attendance, participation in these New Age practices was increasing.
Interesting. So traditional religion wasn't necessarily disappearing, but this other thing was growing alongside it.
Precisely. Their conclusion, based on the source material, was that this reflects a broader subjectivization of faith, a growing preference for personalized, inward-focused spiritual journeys where the individual is the authority, moving away from the more collective, institutionalized, and doctrine-focused forms of traditional religion. It's a significant shift that changes how we think about religious practice today.
It really does.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, we've journeyed through the incredible diversity and dynamic nature of religious groups.
We've armed ourselves with sociological tools to categorize them. Churches, denominations, sects, cults based on structure and societal relationship. Hopefully that's clearer now.
We've looked through the lens of Wallace's NRM classification, world-affirming, world-accommodating, world-rejecting, understanding how groups position themselves relative to society.
We explored the fascinating life cycle of sects through the sectarian cycle model, seeing how they can change over time.
And we've analyzed the social and psychological reasons why NRMs grow, linking it to marginalization, relative deprivation, and responding to rapid social change. You know, the why.
Right, the why. And finally, we touched on the more recent rise of individualistic New Age movements, highlighting the trend towards personalized spirituality, as seen in studies like the Kendall Project.
Understanding these different forms and the forces that shape them is absolutely crucial for sociology. It helps us analyze how religion acts both as a force for social cohesion, binding people together,
And sometimes division.
and sometimes as a catalyst for social change or conflict.
Yeah.
Exactly. It shows how human needs for meaning, belonging, and identity play out in the religious sphere across different social contexts.
It's a constantly evolving picture, isn't it? Which leaves us with this thought for you to carry forward and consider as you observe the world around you. Given the accelerating trend toward self-spirituality, the rise of online communities around beliefs, and increasingly fluid spiritual identities,
Big changes.
do these traditional sociological categories of religious groups still fully capture the complex ways people experience and practice faith today? How might sociologists need to adapt these models to understand the future of religion? Something to think about as you continue your own deep dive into the social world.